Hello and welcome to our Mexico City edition of My Surrogacy Journey, the podcast. I'm Wes.
And I am Michael. Welcome back for another episode.
We are in our Birmingham office.
We are.
We are with an amazing guest. And we're going to not spoil it because we're going to introduce you in a second. But all of our other episodes have been recorded in our Mexico City office. Unfortunately, we couldn't get there today. So we are
couldn't get our guest to the Mexico City. Next time.
Yeah. So we're in our Birmingham office. We have a podcast studio here as well. So we are going to talk today everything about the psychological evaluation which takes place as part of the process. Now, we are going to get down under the hood, as we say, about the kind of the elements of it. And this might be something that you as an intended parent might be quite anxious about. It might be something that kind of invokes a lot of fear or anxiety, or you're just generally curious about why this needs to happen and what part it plays.
Is this another hoop? You know, is this something else I've got to do to prove to someone else that I'm fit to be a parent? You know, it's some of those things that might triggered people when you hear the word psychological evaluation or psychological assessment.
It is like you haven't been through enough already to get to this point, and now you have to jump for another hoop of it. And that might be whether you are a same-sex couple or whether you are a heterosexual couple or you're single, just kind of having the fear of what is this going to do and is this going to stop me from moving forward? And I think I'm really excited to kind of talk about the details of it, because this is not only about for us, a tick box exercise. And, you know, let's just be really clear here. The psychological evaluation is part of the court process. Yeah. It's about making sure that you are psychologically ready or robust to kind of start.
It's that readiness, isn't it? And I really like that word. And I know our guest is going to use that word a lot as well, because I think it just removes some of the anxiety. I think it's just getting you ready.
It is. And one of the things that I think is really important to us as an organisation is that, yes, we do have an element that we need to satisfy the courts that you are, you know, psychologically ready for this. And that's an important part of it. But I think where we go above and beyond is about making sure that intended parents, anyone going through this process, not only are they emotionally ready, but then they have the support mechanisms around them that if any additional support is needed throughout this process, and I'm really excited because I think there's a lot of bit that's going to come out that people just aren't prepared for. Yeah. But I'm going to stop talking.
You need to, really, because I want to meet our guest and let her explain all of this fabulous stuff.
And then, Michael, why don't you introduce our guest?
I would like you to meet, you lovely listener, to our incredible guest, Julianne, and she's going to explain where she's from and what she does and how she's supporting you as one of our members on your route to parenthood. Hello, Julianne.
Hello. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you guys in Birmingham, but I think I would have been more delighted to have been with you guys in Mexico City.
Maybe we'll sort that next time.
I'll let you off on that
for season 2.
For season 2. Look, my name is Julianne Boutaleb. I'm originally from Ireland. Hopefully you can still hear that. I've been working in the perinatal parenting space for about 25 years now. And I've been working more recently with, you know, the alternative paths to parenthood. And again, a lot of that has shifted in the last 25 years because of the, you know, laws around surrogacy, around donor conception. And it's a really exciting time to be supporting parents. Whatever, you know, your path to parenthood, it is a real delight to watch human beings, whether they're, you know, parents already, whether they're partnered or not, actually start to really intentionally think about becoming parents. So that's the work that I and my team of 16 do. We're all over the UK, from Glasgow through to Devon, and we offer online face-to-face work. And we really see the whole gamut of people that come wanting to be parents and support them from intentions to be parents all the way through to when they're parenting children up to 5 years of age. And I think that's why I'm particularly excited with starting to work with you guys.
Oh my word, we're so excited to be working with you.
Because that's what we can really offer, a really varied and, you know, deep dive approach to becoming a parent, and particularly in the surrogacy space. So delighted to be here.
Oh my word, no, it's our pleasure. And I think what Wes and I are really excited about is that this what we're now doing in supporting people, this just doesn't exist in any other global surrogacy organization. And this is what we're really thrilled about because of the level of support through you and your team's experience, coupled with our counsellors' experience, of the robustness and that readiness, that word of giving people that scaffolding to keep everyone safe.
Yeah, they're all really key words. You know, the evaluation, obviously, value. Am I of value? I think that's going to strike fear into the heart of anybody. You know, again, there's a huge range of judgments and stigma that might come with that word evaluation. But actually, the words you've just used, Mike, are really important. We need a village to parent. And when we're parenting in ways that are different from others, and we even more do we need a village. And so this is, if you like, a village, a co-created village with you, with the counsellors, with us in Parenthood in Mind, with Mike, Wes, Carly and all of their team. We're basically gathering around you from the very earliest point in which you're thinking about this path to parenthood and really sort of cheerleading you along all the different paths, all the different steps along that path, so that ultimately you are ready and robust and ready for when your longed for child comes along. You will have this ready-made village and you will be, ready to be the best parent you can be.
And I think we're really pleased that we're creating this environment that gives people that support and gives them the space and helps them understand their individual needs, because we know that everyone comes to this journey from a very, very different place. And I also think it spans wider than that, in terms of, yes, they come from a different place of potentially trying to conceive, or a same-sex couple that doesn't have all of the equipment that they need to naturally create their family and have to go through this process. But I also think that this process invokes, times from when you were being parented. I know we were talking this pre-record, but I think there's a lot of emotion involved in becoming a parent. And I think, we say this a lot, Michael, you don't know what you don't know, but there's no manual for this. There's no kind of training course you can go on that says, well, these are all the things that you need to prepare in advance to be a parent. And I know when we go back to our journey and some of the challenges that caused, because we just weren't prepared, and we didn't feel ill prepared.
No, but you don't know what you don't know.
You didn't know what you didn't know, and I think there was a lot of scenarios that kind of just really knocked us for six that we just weren't prepared for. And I think if we'd have had some support like you guys offer, and we'd have had some knowledge around some of the things that we should potentially anticipate, and we could have explored as a couple how this is going to feel and how are we going to approach it and how are we going to plan, because I think there's lots of dynamics at play. I just think about Michael and I's scenarios. Like, we're dealing with it individually and we're dealing with it as a couple. And your unit's potentially going from 2 to 3, maybe to 4. And how do you prepare for that? Both physically, mentally, psychologically, and then if it's a same-sex couple or even a hetero couple where donors being used, there's then that additional element to consider around.
It's fear as well, isn't it?
It's fear. And I think if we can help people prepare for it, they might not hit those walls that we hit. And then, because that caused issues, right? It nearly broke our marriage at some point. And I think if we can try and avoid some of those, like being blindsided by things, and really, we're never going to be able to do everything, but we had nothing. So even one more thing would have been a massive difference, wouldn't it?
Sure. And you said something a minute ago, which I really found interesting as well. And it's hearing or putting yourself in the parenthood space, and then the regression of what your maybe childhood was like, or hearing a certain word said. Just how common is that whole regressive piece?
Yeah, it's huge. So one of the things we know, and again, this is from being in this space, if you like, I always say to people, there's the great highway to parenthood that, let's say, the majority of people are going to go down. And that's, the lovely, wonderful idea that you can, go out to the pub for a few drinks, come home and away, hey, you're pregnant potentially, within a few weeks. Unfortunately, the sorts of people that I see, that's not the highway to parenthood for them. And that might mean for a cis-het couple that actually they've already been through a reproductive journey that involves loss, that involves understanding that one or other or both of them are infertile, that, there may be cycles of IVF and ICSI that have not worked. Again, within a same-sex same-sex couple, there may be ideas around, I'm not sure, ambivalence around whether or not I want to do this at all, or with you, or, will our relationship withstand this? And also the other thing I'm really passionate about, which you guys are a brilliant example of, is this sense of, if I can see it, I can be it. I mean, who did you guys see doing this in the space? So in other words, for same-sex couples, it might be about actually being able to see others having gone ahead of them, that reassures them that, the big highway to parenthood may not be the road for me, but there is this other very specific road that is well thought through, that is really well scaffolded, to use your word, Mike, that is a safe road for me, because I want to do this well. In every other part of my life, I, attend to my fitness, I attend to my mental health, I attend to my friendships, my relationships, my workplace. Why would anybody want to do, a path to parenthood any differently? So they're the expectations and intentions that people are coming in with. What they perhaps know less about is how these different experiences may trigger them back into other, perhaps less resolved parts of themselves. So, for example, often with same-sex couples, there's a real strong sense of identity, of stigma. Some people talk to me about having to come out all over again in the workplace when they start talking about needing time off, about needing to travel. And suddenly they get this bemused look from the lead that they've worked with for 10 years going, oh, do you have a wife? No, but we are wanting to become parents. So there can be that sense for same-sex couples. For hetero couples, it might be about, the shame and stigma, the sense that, will this be a baby that I can bond with if, I haven't carried her or him or them? And so there are definitely potential steps along the way that can trigger us back into painful parts of ourselves. But the very typical thing that we're often triggered back into when we're becoming parents is our own half-remembered, well, often forgotten experiences of being parented. And that can lead to friction in the couple. For example, there's a lot of longitudinal studies that shows, as you said, was the tension that can happen when you're going from a 2 to a 3. I mean, 2's company, 3's a crowd. Now, if you're needing a 3 or a 4 to make a family, that can obviously give rise to very interesting dynamics of feeling excluded, included, less needed, not needed. And when it comes to sperm and eggs, and identity and connections, you can see how complex this can get. And so what we're starting and hoping to provide is a space where you get to safely take those complexities out of the box, unravel them. So nothing's going to hit you, hopefully, in any, you're not going to be blindsided by anything when, all things going well, you are then finally parenting.
And I also find that, often with not always with same-sex couples, but often you sometimes see that one is more invested in the other and wants this more than the other. And the other one might not be at the same level of acceptance, or they're doing it because they want to please their partner. And I'm not saying that there's right or wrong, but this is the dynamic that approaches.
But I also think as well, you having the journey that you've been on, you're then so fearful to actually speak up because you then might seem ungrateful or you don't appreciate what you're going through, to actually put that flag up and go, oh, actually, I'm not okay. Because you're judged and you feel like you're being judged on this journey already without having to say to your husband or wife or your partner, oh, what you said the other day, it kind of stung a little bit. And then when it especially is something that your mom or your dad said to you and that lasted and that stung and it took you back to that memory, then you're like, oh shit, am I actually going to be a decent parent? You then start doubting yourself.
And I think it's about creating an environment where you can start then exploring how you're feeling. I mean, I know that this would have been massively beneficial for us. Oh my God,
can you imagine?
But I think it would have taken a while for us to recognise that we need it. And I think it would have taken a while for us to recognise the impact of what was coming. Now, we didn't have anyone, like you said, in front of us saying, oh, well, you need to try this because this is something that really impacted us. So I think if anyone is listening today or watching today, that really, it strikes a chord with them about really just accepting that this is a massive life-changing process that you're going through. And that just be open to exploring it, because I genuinely think it will make a massive impact. And one of the other things that I just wanted to pick up from what you were just saying earlier, Jonah, is that don't, as a same-sex couple, assume that you won't face some of those challenges that your heterosexual colleagues face in terms of failed transfers, IVF not working.
We are working, of a dice, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. We're working with a lot of same-sex couples who are having similar issues, even though they're going through surrogacy, issues with sperm, issues with egg donors, issues with embryo numbers.
It doesn't discriminate.
It doesn't. And I think I just want to kind of hopefully manage that expectation that this is not like hetero members manage this and same-sex members manage
really
this.
Isn't.
You know, you're all coming to this with your own emotional elements.
But we're going to help you by providing this
but
service.
then you're also then putting IVF in the mix, which is never certain. So you are putting yourself in an environment which is prone to stress, anxiety, all of those things, right? Yeah. All of those things that are on top of what you're already dealing with as a couple or as a single person.
And speaking to that, I think what's really important is that we want to try and help you hold the tension of the stress, the anxiety, the fearfulness, because as a psychologist, you know, when people are fearful, the front part of your brain, which is the bit that you need to explore, shuts down. You know, you just can't explore. So what we're going to try and, you know, create with you and for you is a safe space where you get to understand perhaps some of the issues that are coming up for you individually or as a couple. And again, just what you said, you know, was the sorts of issues that we're hit with in the parenthood space, you know, loss, death, understanding that perhaps, you know, this very fit body that you've, you know, cultivated for years, that actually you've got a very low sperm count. You know, these are huge discoveries about yourself, about your body, about your identity. And, you know, they don't just go away. And unfortunately, at different stages of the journey, they may be reignited as issues that you need to attend to.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is there's no shame here. Really what we're trying to create is a shame-free, safe space for intended parents to come and unpack some of the issues that they may be worried about. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about what that will entail.
We will. Yeah. We will.
So if I put this analogy...
I've got so many questions, by the way.
Just hold on there. Just hold on. Let me just frame this right. So just for those watching or listening, is that, you know, I mentioned it earlier on in the process, is that, like, let's just say that this whole process is 100%. I would say 10% of this process is a tick box element, which is part of the legal process.
Yeah.
We need to do a psychological evaluation, which, Julianne, your team will do, and you can't fail it. This is all about, we have to demonstrate to the court as part of that legal process that these intended parents have the psychological readiness to be able to, you know, navigate on a journey, because the courts have to do their due diligence and make sure that if they are recommending, you know, a court order to recognise these intended parents as the legal parents, that they have gone through all of the elements to make sure that it's safe, right? And that's primarily what this process is for. But we recognise that that is just a small part of it, and we can't just address that on its own. And you know, doing the psychological evaluation is great, but that is just a small part of it. We recognise through your support, Julianne, is that there's far more involved here. We were just talking about it, but the whole premise of this session today is, yes, there is a psychological bit to do, but there's so much more than that. And about 90% of what we do is all about supporting you as intended parents and making sure that you have that emotional support mechanism outside of the counselling that we already give you, because this is very specific, right?
Yeah. And I think that's where this is exciting, because we could have just done the bare minimum, done an evaluation for that 10% that we need,
and that's what everyone else does.
Everybody else does. But that is not how we roll. That's not how we work. When we get introduced to people at the top of their game and what they do, we want to share that little black book of contacts with our members. And
again, Mike, you know, this is part of setting the standard right. No one else globally is doing this and attending to these needs. We recognise this through your help and our own experience that this is such a fundamental part of it.
It really is.
And it's one thing that if you don't address it, it then ricochets through the whole journey.
Of course it does.
We really want to
into
try
parenthood potentially.
Absolutely. And it's also about how can you be the best parent, and to be the best parent, you have to understand how you react and how you've got there, right?
Absolutely. And I think for me that the implications counselling that is, you know, mandatory is a snapshot, and it's a useful snapshot of sorts. But what we're trying to do is sort of a short film, I guess. You know, we're taking a snapshot and saying, you know, in terms of readiness, in terms of, you know, what you need to think about or maybe have some time out to explore, this is where you are in terms of readiness. You're not going to be failed. You're going to have opportunities, you know, with therapists, with perhaps, you know, Wes and Mike, with other resources that we're going to build over the next few months and years, hopefully, to really prepare for parenting. And I guess, if you like, this is a really specific alternative antenatal class. You know, that's what we're looking to create, almost an antenatal class before you go into mainstream antenatal classes potentially. But what we know in the research over the last 30 years is that if you are, so there's two very robust variables in research. One is psychological readiness to parent. So in other words, a realistic sense of what parenting entails, and, you know, where you are in that, in terms of, you know, being ready to sacrifice, you know, hours of time, etc. How you're feeling within your relationship is also a key variable. But the key variable that comes out over and over again, and it's come out in the longitudinal studies that Professor Susan Gollenbach has put together on children of surrogacy, is support, social support. And that's mind-blowing. So for me, what that means is you might be coming to this journey with a mental health history. You might be coming to this journey with perhaps a bit of tension in your couple's relationship. To be honest, why wouldn't you be? Because you're probably already at the very thin end of a very long journey through all the sorts of things that I just mentioned a few minutes ago. That is not going to count against you. What we're saying is take time, and a little bit like, I mean, if surrogacy is the sprint, parenting, believe you me, as a solo parent of a 14-year-old, is a marathon. And I think Wes and Michael probably attest to that. So we're preparing you not only for the sprint, we are preparing you for the marathon. And what we're hoping to do is to give you a sense of how you get fit for the parenting marathon. And really and honestly, what often happens within the Parenthood in Mind practice is we'll see you for this bit, which is the psychological evaluation. We'll have, you know, and again, we'll go into some detail around that in a few minutes. But it might be that you want to come back and go, you know what you said about our relationship is really interesting. Could we have a couple of sessions with one of your couples counsellors? Absolutely. It might be when, fingers crossed, you know, these longed for babies finally arrive, you realise that, you thought you'd be doing that and he said he'd be doing the other. But actually those early days of parenting have thrown up some more issues that need to be resolved. In other words, we're there for you wherever. And that is actually the sorts of journeys that we commonly see, particularly with the gorgeous parents that we see who have had to go down these alternate routes to parenthood. They come back over and over again, and they've developed a model, I guess, where they've destigmatized help.
Yeah.
And that is the crucial variable, social support. If you as a parent to be are already starting to see, and hopefully you will through the process that you'll go on with us, that actually help is really helpful and is making you, you know, and helping you be the partner you want to be and the parent you want to be, then I'm hoping that's what you're going to be taking with you as a plus into your parenting journey.
I think we need to create an environment where it's okay to say that you need help. It's okay to say, and I've got some mental health challenges. It's okay to say I'm on medication. It's okay to say all of those things, because
of course it is.
And until we know exactly where your baseline is, how can you build from there? How can we put those mechanisms in place? And not everyone's the same, right? You know, how you parent and how I parent, or how we approach things is very, very different. And like, this is I mean, I speak to so many IPs. They're right. You can just tell they're in a stressful environment. Even from that first call I have with them, you can tell. I've learned now. You can read the dynamics of the relationship, and it's.
But we're almost giving not even permission to, but we're almost saying you can talk to us. This is your safe space of professionals where it's okay to say your marriage might have not been great. It's okay to say, oh God, it really pisses me off when he says it. It's totally fine.
Yeah, it is. But I also think that, you know, you've got to come from a place where you're happy to talk about these things. You've got to be open to it. If you're not going to benefit from them. I mean, we can't make people do this.
No, you're right.
We can't. But we do have to fulfill the psychological evaluation. So people do have to take part. But and I'm sure you would agree with Julianne, we've got to encourage people to be honest. And, you know, this isn't going to stop them from being a parent, but what this is going to do is identify where they need some support or where the kind of things that they may need an extra boost here, or they may need some additional counselling. Because like you say, most people, when they've got to that juncture of surrogacy, they've been through hell. And, and look what happens to your relationship when you're going through hell. We've all been there, right?
Well, parenting is one of the top stressors for couples anyway. It is a stress line. There's a fabulous graph, and maybe I'll send it to you guys to put on the website. whereby couples come into the honeymoon period, I think 2 years after getting together. And then with the birth of the first child, their
I'm listening.
their level of happiness and contentment as a couple starts to dive off a cliff. It starts to come back off the cliff when the first child goes into school. Guess what? You got a bit more space again. And
Everyone's nodding.
And then it stays very steady until there's another child, and then the same dynamic happens.
Then it drops.
And then when that baby doesn't sleep, it goes like plummets.
Well, I'm talking to the converted, obviously. So, and the other pressure point is teen years. So you go through years from sort of about 5 to 11, and once they start hitting puberty, your stress as a couple is back up where it would have been when they were born. Now, the really awful, really sad data that we have in the last 3 years is that 1/3 of relationships will not survive past the first child starting school. So, you know, there are pressures to becoming a parent.
Of course.
And if you've already come through a very pressurized, difficult journey, then it's easy. It's safe to say, isn't it, that your relationship has probably had much more stress and pressure put on it.
And it's probably more likely to fail.
Absolutely.
Which is why you need to put the steps in place to try and prevent it from failing. Yeah. And also, if you look at those people who have their families in the most conventional ways, never have to worry about this, never have to kind of go through family forming challenges, they don't get all of this support and scaffolding.
Oh my word.
Which is why those stats are probably as high as they are.
They are. And the one thing I often say, people often say to me, why do you work in this space? You know, why do you work in egg donation and, donor conception and surrogacy? Because honestly, what I see, the level of creativity, the level of, reimagining yourself as a parent, it is so exciting as a therapist. Because, I often say that there's something that you gain by becoming a parent in this way, which is you have to rethink, you have to remake the norms, you have to examine every single assumption maybe that a cis-het couple would make, or maybe not even make. You have to time and again look at it and go, will this be how we do it? How do we do it this way? And honestly, what you see, and again, the data from a lot of the longitudinal studies, is the warmest, most committed relationships between partners that stay together, and particularly was really interesting for male parents towards their children. In other words, there's a sort of an alchemy between the struggles you've had, the very charged, pressurized path you've got to go down to become a parent, and with the right support, this amazing, creative reimagining of, the dream of parenting that we're sold in sort of wider society.
And I think,
and it is magical.
It is.
It's magical.
And you said some really key words there. It's like this, it's kind of the vision of parenting that you see in the world when you don't fit into that because you haven't been able to access that route.
You just can't imagine it.
You just can't imagine. And also, like, you would never start a job and then have no training but be expected to be the perfect person within that role, would you? It just would not happen, right? No. So why do we expect it and put so much pressure on ourselves to be the perfect
exactly what
parents?
I was going to say. That's exactly
no
what
one
we
has
do.
kind of given us any of the tools. We just think we're going to do the best of it.
But we put such pressure on ourselves.
We do, and that's one of the things that I want to talk about, is because we do put pressure on ourselves, and we have to be this perfect family. We have to be this perfect family on Instagram, where and that's just not reality. And I think the sooner we kind of reset it, give everyone permission, but also give them the kind of the mechanisms where they can get that support and they can build it. So let's just quickly talk about.
This is fascinating. By the way,
it is fascinating, and
I'm really enjoying this.
I want to make sure we cover the main bits. But,
I know. I've just looked at the questions.
So when are we
going to start from the big?
Yeah. So when a set of intended parents are kind of at that point where they need to start thinking about the psychological evaluation, which forms part of the court process. Now, that will be once they're confirmed pregnant. Yeah. It is. So talk to us, Julianne, about what will that process look like? So one of your membership managers will recommend and start, introduce you to you and your team. What will they see from that point in?
So they'll be lined up with a member of my team from Parenthood in Mind. But what they'll get initially is, and hopefully it won't be too overwhelming for you, but a raft of sort of forms to sort of fill in. And again, what we're doing is we're sort of giving you a space before you come and see us. That sort of the actual appointment will be about 75 minutes long, but the sorts of forms that you might get will be looking at mental health, so anxiety, depression, might be looking at your couple's relationship, you know, how close you feel or not. It'll also be looking at experiences you've been through, perhaps through loss or multiple medical procedures such as IVF or miscarriage and so on. But it will be asking you also to think about the developing baby. And again, that's what makes this unique because, of course, and, you know, it sounds obviously very trite to say, but this is what you're here to do, is to create a family. And ironically, what I see often happen amongst the implications counselling and the sort of standards that are already here in this space is that the baby, the actual child, the actual process of parenting seems to be forgotten about. So what you'll have is a form called the Parental Antenatal Assessment Scale. And they're just questions thinking about, you know, how are you thinking about the baby? You know, how are you going to continue, you know, a connection with the baby? And of course, there's all sorts of, you know, difficulties with that in terms of distance, in terms of, you know, distance away geographically and so on, given, you know, that the surrogate will be in Mexico City. But it will be a space where you really get to pause and think about yourselves, if coupled, as a couple, as an individual, where you'll get to think about, you know, how perhaps past experiences, not just of medical treatment, but also your own past experiences of being parented, might be in the mix here. And really, the one thing I want to assure you is that the four others who are involved with me on this project, we all bring to this decades of experience. We're all psychologists, we're also parent-infant psychotherapists and couples therapists.
Wow.
So whatever it is that you need, we can provide you.
It's phenomenal.
And we want to do that in a really destigmatized, shame-free way. We're all also really passionate, as I said, about these families, and we feel really incredibly attached to the outcomes with you. So hopefully you'll find us to be, you know, a cheerleading person. And again, you'll work it out with the person you get to see. It might be that you just meet them for the evaluation. What will happen after the evaluation then is that we will put together a sort of a one-page sort of legal report for the court in Mexico. You will get to see that. If there are any issues within that we feel, you know, need addressing, again, we won't be sharing that information with anyone else before we share it with you. And it might then be that from this process, it might be, for example, that your age-old anxiety that you thought was in the past has come up again. Mm-hmm. It might be talking to you about, you know, potentially thinking about medication, or maybe seeing one of the BICA counsellors that are also part of the My Surrogacy Journey package, or it might be indeed, as we've said, having some space with your partner to think about how you want to parent together. Nothing is off limits. And really what I see it as, yes, there is a court sort of mandatory part of this, but it is your first chance to start thinking about what it is that you need on this journey. And we will co-create. We will, you know, create a smorgasbord of parenting input and interventions for you that hopefully help you along the journey to becoming parents.
But it's very individualised, isn't it? This is about, you know,
tailor-made.
You spend some time with them. They understand if there's any gaps or anything that they need any additional support on. Yeah. You then will, with us, help them understand what that needs to be and how we can then administer it. Some of it might be within membership package. Some of it might be outside. But it's about, you know, this is how we think we can help you. Let's look at how we can achieve that. Yeah,
absolutely. And we're up to hearing from you. You know, we know that it's going to be challenging to sit down and to go through these questions. You know, you've already had to go, I think you used the word failed, and that word is so triggering, isn't it? Because people have been through failed cycles of IVF. They will have failed, you know, to be parents in other more orthodox ways, perhaps, if they're a cis-het couple. And so we're going to take that word out. We're basically looking at identifying and optimizing aspects of your couple relationship, of you as an individual, so that, you know, you feel prepared for the parenting bit, yes, but also, let's face it, the antenatal bit, which is, holding hope that your longed for baby will take and will be, the pregnancy will continue, and developing an ongoing relationship with them, from a distance, etc., etc. So all of these things are up for discussion. And what I'm really hopeful about with time is that we start to create bite-sized resources for everybody along the way.
Yeah. And we absolutely are. But I also think that the very nature of doing this journey in Mexico City does increase the kind of anxiety. You're not in control of certain elements, and those are other things, dynamics that we have to manage there.
Unfamiliar surroundings.
It is, and I think, Michael, we look back at our journey. We were nowhere near prepared, right? Gosh, were we? No. And we've lived.
There were things you didn't want to talk about. We knew there were issues, but we were like, no, I'm not going to bring that up because baby's here in 3 weeks, and if I mention this, what is that going to do?
Yeah, but I also don't think we'd allowed ourselves the permission in our relationship to talk about it. No. We hadn't created an environment where we could talk about how it was making us feel, and
specifically when there's a non-genetic link. So especially with Talulah, with you.
But I also think that in a same-sex couple as well. I mean, this might not be for every same-sex couple, but for us, there was the kind of the male factor of like, I don't want to show my emotions. I don't want people to know that I'm feeling like this, or I don't even know how to handle it myself. So how am I going to talk to you about it? Because I don't know what's happening, but I know I've got to hold it all together. All of those things are very real.
I definitely think since becoming parents, it definitely something else was sparked, or there was an awakening of how we communicate now, and much better when we're feeling the way we are, or when something doesn't feel right, we say it. Whereas previously, when you're two men in a relationship, you constantly feel like you're battling anyway, just because of the very nature of the makeup of the relationship. So there were things that you just don't say. But since having the kids and coming out the other end after it not being particularly great at one point, it's enabled us to communicate far better now.
It has, but I think the work we do has also enabled us to do that.
Yeah, because we understand.
Because we understand it, and we have a much greater understanding, and we're exposed to professionals like you that help us view the world in a different way. But
something that you mentioned a minute ago. So in terms of the report that gets completed, who sees that, and whose eyes are they for?
Well, that is ultimately for the lawyers and the court. But I feel really strongly that intended parents should see that too.
No, totally.
And, I feel we don't want to write anything that would feel discriminatory or unclear. Because, again, I think the word that comes to mind, listening to the two of you just now, is vulnerability.
Yeah.
This is vulnerable. You mentioned court, then you add Mexico, then you add what, this entails. So we want to be really open about this process. We want to include you in it. And, we want you to have a look over it. But essentially, there is, I think what's difficult about the process is that we're trying to do multiple things all at the same time. So we're trying to satisfy, you can hear the word, it becomes very legal, satisfy legal requirements, whilst also creating a space safe enough for you to open up. We understand the tensions of those, possibly conflicting dynamics. So it would be really important that whatever we send, is in line with what you're, comfortable with, and also what we want to assure you that if anything comes up, and potentially, let's say worst case scenario, something came up that maybe the couple weren't willing to disclose previously. Let's say it was about particularly difficult mental health matters at the moment that are causing issues at work. Perhaps there were financial stresses or whatever. What we would never be saying you're not suitable. We'd be saying let's maybe pause this for a bit, and is it a way of thinking about what supports you need? Is it about maybe taking time off work? Is it about getting So we don't just think about mental health in terms of diagnosis or medication or whatever. We think about it in the round, and so. Within the 75 minutes, we have a very specific goal and we have a very specific function to fulfill. But following on from that, if you felt that you wanted to discuss something that had come up and to look for more support for yourself in whatever different way that would be appropriate, that's what we would then, offer following on from that.
But for me, I think it's about being really open and honest. And I've had a conversation with Melissa and Enrique about this, following our call last week, because I met with them this week. And it's about demonstrating to the court that, like, yes, there are some elements where we need some additional support. And because of that, we've put this, and this in place.
Exactly.
For me, that says far more
Exactly.
about the situation, how you're approaching it, and what mechanisms you've put in place to, you know, try and manage it. Because like, the courts aren't stupid. You know, they know they're a family court. They see stuff all of the time. But I think what we're saying is we want to demonstrate that we're putting robust mechanisms in place. Yeah. And that's all the court's looking for.
Yeah.
And they're not looking for a right or wrong. They're looking for, do they have confidence that this family has all the support they need?
Yeah.
Can they get those mechanisms? And, you know, is that child going to be safe?
Yeah.
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 Absolutely. And I think by dealing with it, there's a much higher chance of that child and that family getting everything they need versus someone who who just kind of closes down, isn't honest with you, and makes it look like everything's rosy. There's more of a problem.
That is, unfortunately, the wheels come off later, I think. What we're saying now is the wheels aren't going to come off, but you might be pointing out to us that the tire's a bit flat.
Yeah.
And then we're going to say, we need a bit more air, or we need to change the tire or whatever. But again, the research over decades is pretty robust. And we know now, for example, things that we often talk about as postnatal depression or even postpartum psychosis or whatever, there are often very clear signs antenatally. And actually, we can also look at history.
How fascinating.
To predict which couples are potentially going to do better along the path to parenthood than others.
Wow.
Yeah. But what an environment where members can have access to your team, where you can actually just be really honest, and let's just be really clear here. Like, we as a team at MSJ do not get access to any of that information.
No, that's important to say.
Totally confidential between you and your team.
It's a medical report,
It is
right?
a medical report. And then the intended parents have to consent to the information that's then given to the legal team to then be submitted to the court. So you are always in control of all of this information. It's not that anyone's going to have access to it. You know,
absolutely not. And we hold confidentiality as a key part of how we work. You know, we're all registered with the British Psychological Society, which is the key body in the UK for psychologists. We're also, some of us, accredited by UKCP, HCPC. So we have very clear ethical guidelines that we have to consider and follow, and confidentiality is one of those. And we would talk that through with you even before we start taking information from you. We hold confidentiality, really, it's a very important part of what we do.
And it's a really important part of what we do, you know, from a clinical point of view and all of that, you know, really personal information. So if something was highlighted in one of the sessions that you had and you needed to talk to us about some additional support that we can help them with, those intended parents would have to consent to you talking to us about it and that support. And then when you did talk to us, it would be only a very small members of the team who would then have access to that information to then be able to get that resource where it's needed, and that information again is secured from our side, because we take that really, really seriously. You know, this is really such a personal thing with so much information out there,
and we will have particular consent forms for you to go through. The other thing is, in terms of sharing it with wider medical professionals as well, some people, again, depending on where they are in the journey, might want us to reach out to the GP, for example, if it is about maybe thinking about medication, or it might be about being able to access support through the NHS perinatally. So that will be something that we can help with. We have lots of different connections back into the NHS. But again, we would only be making those referrals or writing those letters with the intended parents, you know, very obvious consent.
Yeah. And we've talked a lot today about, you know, we've made a lot of references to the NHS and potentially UK related organisations. You know, this is also going to be accessible for those that live outside of the UK. You know, if you're in Europe, if you're in North America, we are looking at building a framework so that your team can support them as well, because, you know, Michael and I have talked really extensively about how valuable we feel that this is. I think it's going to be, you know, I would go as far to say as a world first in terms of giving people all of this infrastructure and scaffolding and kind of, you know, psychological support to make them really ready and robust enough.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to welcoming the IPs, and maybe there's going to be some scope for research that, you know, we actually prove.
Without a doubt. That's all, we've already been thinking
the
about
outcomes, and because there is nothing more pleasing. You know, we're not here as experts in the parenting and the perinatal field to damn people. We're here to support and help. And honestly, I've been doing this job for 25 years now, and I absolutely love my job. And I am so excited about this project. We all are as a team. And I think it's because, as I said, it's the magic that can happen when people feel supported, when they feel they can look to others and go, yeah, because you've told me about your issues, because you've been vulnerable, because you've told me about how you dealt with those, I believe that I can do that now as well. But again, within the same sex space, or, you know, hetero couples needing surrogacy, where are the role models? Where are the narratives? Where are the stories? You know, to see it is to believe it, you know, and in mainstream terms, there isn't enough.
No,
there isn't. We know surrogacy is generally, you know, underrepresented.
Yeah.
It's the unknown. There's not enough out there about it, and that is changing. You know, through people, the work you're doing, the work we're doing.
It's changing, but it's still, if you were to take, or maybe IVF and ICSI were 30, 40 years ago, I think surrogacy is there.
Yeah,
it's in that opening up place, and it's thanks to the work you guys are doing that it is opening up. But this is why what we're hoping to create together is, I'm really excited about it.
We honestly, we can't even tell you how excited we are.
A quick question for me though. So if you get this intended parent who has been through a real challenge, whether it's same-sex hetero, but they couldn't think of anything worse than sitting there and talking to you about their really intimate personal things. What would you say to that person who's like fearful of opening up and really doesn't want to do it? But what would you say to them about what a difference it could make, and how could they approach it?
And prepare for it.
Prepare for it. I would say, well, there will be a little bit of preparation. Hopefully listening to us today will, you know, dial down the level of anxiety. Hopefully you're hearing in my voice that, you know, and I know, I mean, people say psychologist, you know.
It's quite a frightening word.
It is a frightening word.
And again, I've always worked in the community. So I was one of the first psychologists in Britain to set up the Sure Start Psychology. I was there at the heady time when there was lots of money in the NHS, and I set up community-based psychology services. And again, we had to fight that stigma. How will people come in? You know, the typical fear is, I'll go in and you'll basically say I'm mad. Or maybe I don't realise I'm mad or crazy, and you'll send me off, excuse the language, but off to the loony bin or whatever. They're real fears. Of course they are. And I feel that it's really important that I want them to see us. So, you know, you'll have us on the website, you'll have me on the website. Hopefully you're listening to me. Hopefully I feel sort of safe.
You're so nice to listen to.
I don't know, but I really want people to be assured that if there's at any stage that you need more information about the evaluation, about what it's going to entail, we will endeavour, you know, it might be that you need a phone call with whoever you go to see, first of all, so that you can hear and feel that they're safe, because this is about safety, about you being vulnerable in a space where you often are going to feel judged or, you know, monitored or, you know, any of those things. So I'm really hoping that together, because this is sort of a first, that we want feedback from you as well as to what feels helpful, what feels good. I also feel that it's really important that maybe other surrogate parents and other, you know, same-sex partners get to sort of buddy up or meet each other as well, so that they can start with the community. And I know that's something you guys have thought about. So that's possibly something that we build on to this as well eventually. The village is important. See it so you can be it is one of my mottos.
I like that.
And I really hope that, again, maybe we need to put that out there in terms of research, that the research is really clear. If you can prepare as well as you can to become, you know, the mother and father, or, you know, mama, dada, papa, whoever you become for these longed for children, you are doing the best you can already. And probably more than most in the parenting space. And that's what makes it amazing.
And I think, Michael, we need to have a look about how we can get and create some resource that sits in the app for when it launches.
Totally.
Which then kind of helps people prepare for this, because I think sometimes just having a look through the types of forms and the types of questions that you're going to get asked helps you prepare. It reduces your anxiety levels. So I think if you go into it with a bit more equipped by seeing some of that stuff, and I know we're going to record some content around how to help people,
and just knowing who's going to talk to you is often the thing.
Really
it's just like, am I going to get along with them? Are they going to be judging me? And just this
safe space
episode today is just, it's helping, I think, the listener really get to grips that you're a cheerleader for them. You are on their team.
Yes, absolutely.
We are not here to pass judgment. We are here to be at that sideline with them as well.
If anything, this team is there to get you there. That's what it's designed for.
We want to get you over the line, and then when you're over the line, we want to be part of the journey beyond that.
Celebrate with
and
you.
I can honestly say, when I've worked with, parents via surrogacy, and I've done some work with the Intended Parent podcast and others, as I say, you are amazing as parents, because the amount of hurdles you have to get through, the amount of revisioning and reimagining you have to do. There is magic in this space. I know at the moment it doesn't feel magic, and I imagine it feels very, very different from what I'm describing. But please rest assured that we are here to help you create the magic, and that we are on your team, we're on your side, and we want the best for you and for your children. That's why I'm in this space.
No, and that's it. It's about, have the faith that we're here to enable you. We're here to help you make it happen.
We've created this for a reason.
We have, and I'm really proud of what we're building, because I think this is going to change people's lives.
Things,
and I don't say that lightly, but I think it will.
Absolutely
if we get this right, and we build the environment that's going to enable people in every aspect, and give them and make them ready as ready as they can be. But I think it's better than nothing, right?
I think visually a lot. So as the two of you are talking, I'm thinking of the marathon. We're the guys on the side, that handing out the water bottles, the drinks, and
my
there's different
electrolytes.
Drinks. You're handing out those electrolyte that looks like
a margarita,
and that's what we're doing. And we want to get you over the line. We're cheerleading you on the side.
We are. This is just gold.
Well, look, I have really enjoyed this particular session. I think there's lots in there, and there's lots to take away, and there's lots to think about. So you might want to listen to this episode more than once.
So if you have found this episode really useful, there are more to come, but it's definitely been a favourite of mine. Wes, highlight for you,
I don't think there is one. I think I found the whole episode really like lifting. I think
strikes a chord.
We've been talking about this for a while, right? And we know what we want to create. We know where the gaps are, and this is why this podcast is being recorded in the UK. Not only because we couldn't get you there, Julianne, but also it was still working process when we were filming and recording the ones in Mexico City. But I think it's absolutely what is needed. It is so tailor made, and I think. I think for me, the takeaway is that it is absolutely, it's just not one size fits all. It's about how can your team work with those intended parents, understand what their needs are, where the gaps are, because we've all got gaps, we've all got gaps. And how do we then look at what those gaps are and give you them some support to kind of make you the finished package?
Amazing. So if you want more information, then feel free to head over to the app where you will see some of this content, or you can head to our website, which is www.mysurrogacyjourney.com.
Well, it has been amazing recording this podcast session today. So thank you, Julianne. I've really thoroughly enjoyed it. And for me, go and listen to this one. I know the rest of the episodes are already out there, but add this to your repertoire if you haven't already listened to it.
I'm going to make sure we really spotlight this episode because it's a really useful one. So, episode number 9, I think it is.
This is episode number 9. So wherever you get your podcast.
Yes, we're there. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Bye-bye.